guys are putting on some type of Hollywood production out here. But thank you so much for being here. I want to recognize some special people. State Representative Pat Rooney, Palm Beach Town Councilman Bill Diamond, Vice Mayor of Lantana Joe Flagello, and of course my dear friend and now neighbor, the Chairman of the Palm Beach County GOP, Sid Dimerston. It's truly a pleasure to be here with you at the beautiful, magnificent Boiler Center. Let's give a round of applause to the staff. Before I like to begin, I'd like to recognize some very special ladies that enabled me to be where I am today. Most times they aggravate me, they pick fun at me. Last night I got in after a long week and the alarm was going off in the house that we now have up here at Palm Beach Gardens, and that's the last thing we have. But I'd like to recognize my wife, Angela. People don't understand the magnitude of the sacrifice that goes into being a military spouse. And those who have not lived it can only truly guess what it is like. And not only has Angela been a military spouse, she's also been the daughter of a career military man. Spent 20 plus years in the military, 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. She is truly a woman of Sparta, and she truly understands what it knows to sacrifice for this country. And Angela, I thank you for Of course, I have to recognize 2 little knuckleheads. My 2 lovely daughters, Aubrey and Austin. The tough thing is that I've been away from them a lot of their lives, but they still always recognize and understand why Dad does what he does. I will never forget the greatest day probably in my life. We're coming back from Iraq in December of 2003, and the 2 of them ran up to me and said, "Daddy, we love you, we're proud of you, and welcome home." I thought about what I could say, what could I share with you today, and I want to share with you just my story, and why this is probably, without a doubt, the most important election cycle for this great constitutional republic as we go forward. 2 years ago, we witnessed something that was miraculous when the people of South Florida came together to send a black conservative, a former soldier, to the United States House of Representatives. In one of the most competitive districts in the country, I became the first black Republican from the state of Florida elected to the United States Congress since 1865. The trust that you placed in me to be your representative was among the greatest honors of my life, and I will never forget it. But to understand the things that brought us to this moment, one first must understand the things that make me who I am. No single value has played a more formative role in shaping my perspective as the commitment I feel to service to a higher cause. I learned that from my father who served in World War II. I saw that from my older brother who served in Vietnam. And then in 1983, I put it in practice when I graduated from the University of Tennessee and received a commission in the United States Army. That commitment is one that I've carried with me ever since. It was sharpened during Desert Storm and hardened in Iraq. It was heightened in Afghanistan and tested in Kuwait. Through 22 years of military service, that commitment was the compass that continually pointed me in the right direction. And in 2010, it was the driving force behind my decision to come back and make another run for office after falling short in 2008. And having so many of you come up and pick me up and say, get back out there and try and do it again. The thing that you have to understand about old soldiers, and I know there's a lot of us old soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guards from here today, is that we truly never retire from action. That desire to make a difference doesn't just fade away when we lay down our arms. Years of preparation make us believe that we could be called upon again at any moment, and years of training ensure that we'll be ready if we are. You see, it was the same commitment that first led me to put on a camouflage uniform that inspired me to swap out boots and camis for a suit and tie. The decision to run for Congress was not one that I took lightly, but it was one that I took seriously because it was rooted in the belief that when your country calls, you must answer. You don't say no. I've met with thousands of American families, and I felt that calling every single time because I see right now how much my fellow Americans are hurting, how hard they're working, and how hard it is to still get by, how frustrated they are with the government's complacency and ineptness, and how tired they get of simply being told that someone else knows what's best. I think often of George Washington and how he was never out for glory. His only concern was to serve half as nobly in a civilian capacity as he had served as a soldier. And it was George Washington who once stated, happiness and moral duty are inseparably connected. He knew that a man who serves a higher cause may indeed suffer during the day, but at least he will sleep well at night. Of course, service for me has always been about doing more than what you were asked to do. In many cases, I believe the finest service that anyone can perform is to speak the truth, and speak it often, whether people are ready to hear it or not. I've been known, as you well know, speak my mind. And of course, it's been known to ruffle a few feathers. But the willingness is why I am the #1 target for the National Democrat Party, the liberal progressives, and their acolytes. Because I'm a different kind of elected official than they have ever seen before. I am not a politician by trade. I learned to communicate on the battlefield where nuance is not at all useful. And actually, it can be dangerous, if not fatal. I come from a world where people say what they mean, and they mean what they say. Because while others are in Washington, D.C. seeking to make friends, I kind of like to make waves. Because while others are trying to get famous, I'm trying to get stuff done. And unfortunately, in our world, in our country today, that can make you infamous. But for better or worse, I have always done is what I believe God gave me to see what was right. And for better or for worse, no matter the consequences, you can always rest assured that I will. Look, when it comes to getting this country back on track, if the mainstream media is attacking you, you know that you're doing something right. And as we say in the military, and those people who have ever flown fighter pilots, you're only taking flack if you're over the target. So what does it mean to stand on principle? For me, it means there's a set of enduring values that imbue with life the things that I believe. If the policies I support are a tapestry, the common strand is my belief in the supremacy of the individual, the American citizen. That belief that human life has dignity, and therefore human beings should be sovereign, explains better than any party platform why I stand for what I stand. It's why I think the first goal of government should be to make itself as unnecessary as possible. To minimize its footprint and to give people the space to innovate, compete, flourish, and be prosperous. Of course, when they fail, provide the safety net, which allows the opportunity to succeed for them to continue to strive. We don't believe that the safety net should ever be a hammer. You'll find that respect for freedom and autonomy is in virtually every position that I take. Our political opponents sometimes portray my opposition to raising taxes as wanting to give handouts to the rich. What they don't understand is that it's not about taking from some people and giving it to others. It is about letting everyone, no matter who they are or where they come from, keep more of what they have earned. Very simple. When the government appropriates from the taxpayers more than it absolutely needs, that's not serving the public interest. That is legal plunder based upon misconceived philanthropy. The higher the tax burden, the taller the obstacles for American businesses, and the more likely they are going to take their jobs elsewhere, to another country that won't punish them for doing well. The tougher it is to invest and expand, the less likely companies are going to take the risk of hiring new workers. And the more complex and onerous the regulatory scheme, the more resources people are forced to tie up on red tape and compliance. I support a flatter, fairer tax code because I think it's wrong to hold a person hostage to their own success. We cannot be like Little League Baseball, where everyone gets a trophy. We can promote ingenuity and entrepreneurship and put Americans back to work. But it will take a government that is willing to loosen the reins that hold the private sector back. Unfortunately, the president does not care. When he said yesterday the private sector is doing well, I don't know what plan the president is on, but it is not in the United States of America. Therefore, it will take leaders who are more concerned about the growth of the economy than the expansion of a socialist, egalitarian nanny state. History has shown us the secret to economic prosperity. It's very simple. It's to have smart, hard-working people in competition with each other. It's the engine that powered the progress of nations. That's the tide that lifts all boats. It's the key to success as for America over the past 235 years, which is why the best government it can do for the economy is to get out of the way. Allow the free market in this competition, not nationalizing production, to be our guiding light. By passing a balanced budget amendment, which unfortunately some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle do not believe in, we can start to get our almost $16 trillion debt under control. And by reducing that debt, we'll be able to free up resources that businesses can put to better use. Let's look at Obamacare, the Patient Protection Reform and Care Act. It is not out of disdain for those without insurance, but out of concern for all Americans that I would support repeal of the Patient Protection Reform. and not wanting people to suffer because they can't afford medical treatment. But I reject the notion that introducing a new layer of government, bureaucracy, is going to do anything but make matters worse. 2 years after passage, we're seeing the cost of health care tick upwards at an even more alarming rate. The price of an already expensive service is being ever higher, not driven by market forces or greedy doctors, but by federal interference. People everywhere are being concerned and coerced through force to spend money on things they don't even want. And employers everywhere are finding they can no longer afford to offer the coverage to their workers at all. Americans will be losing their health plans and their doctors. Bureaucrats will be making life and health care decisions for our seniors. It's a bad idea that is wrapped in nearly 3,000 pages of rules, regulations, and yes, 18 new taxes. And it's indicative of an all too common truth. More often than our liberal friends would like to admit, an action meant to fix one problem ends up introducing many more problems. Reform should be about solving problems for the American people, not creating new ones. Instead of adding to this bureaucratic mess that is our current healthcare system, we should be working to free it from the bonds of waste and inefficiency. Instead of stifling it with government, we should be encouraging competition. Only markets can drive down the cost and drive up quality of healthcare. Washington has a good day, but it manages not to screw things up. That is equally true when it comes to education. No one is well served when the federal bureaucracy tries to impose top-down controls on our schools. Teachers end up hamstrung. Parents end up shut out of the decision-making process. And students, our next generation, end up as collateral damage. You know, the bureaucratic inefficiencies always lead to deadweight laws. But those losses are particularly troubling when it's our children's futures online. And when it comes to this issue, many of you know that I can speak from experience, having taught high school at Deerfield Beach for 1 year after retirement. And that was such an enjoyable experience. And I volunteered to go to Afghanistan. I know that while it was well mentioned, no child left behind has not delivered on its promise. And it breaks my heart to know how many students right here in our South Florida community are slipping through the cracks. And I know that we can do better. If we really want to, we can get the federal government out of these South Florida schools. We can take ownership. And once and for all, that's why we have school boards. Let's restore that local focus, that local control for our schools. We must do better because a nation that refuses to invest in the next generation is paving its way for decline. But that investment does not mean to include wasting taxpayer dollars on more bureaucratic policies either. That's why I support giving parents the ability to choose the school best able to meet their child's needs. Why I support taking power away from teachers' unions. Back to the parents, back to the principals, back to the school boards, back to the teachers that are performing well and being effective. Most importantly, is one of the reasons why I ran for office in the first place, because of those two young ladies right there. You know, it's not just about K through 12 either. Last month there were more new college graduates just in the state of Florida than there were jobs created in the entire United States of America. Too many young people are finishing school with a mountain of debt and few employment prospects. Too many are wondering where change that they hope for went. Between April and May, an additional 250,000 individuals between the ages of 18 and 29 joined the unemployment roll. And 1 in 2 was already underemployed, meaning they could not find full-time work that would utilize their skills. But meanwhile, our liberal friends want to make it even easier for our children to rack up student loan debt they will find even harder to pay down. Because inside the Patient Protection of Affordable Care Act, they increase college education loan interest because the federal government has now nationalized college education loans. It's just another example of how federal programs can end up hurting the very people that they believe that they were intended to help. And that's why I call it misconceived philanthropy. I don't know where the president's heart is, but the way I learned, being brought up in Georgia, when you find yourself in a hole, it's a good idea to stop digging. And speaking of digging, what about energy policy? Abundant, affordable energy is the lifeblood of our economy. It's part of our energy security. It's part of our national security. We cannot survive without it, and we're vulnerable as long as we depend on foreign entities to acquire it. Yet, this administration is actively shutting down every single avenue for domestic production. And when they close off a source of energy, it's families, just like each and every one of you sitting out here, you're going to be punished for it. I truly do support an all-the-above strategy, energy approach, from oil and natural gas, to coal and nuclear, to wind and solar to hydroelectric. I want to have the full spectrum development of the resources competing for the privilege of powering America's way of life. I don't buy the notion that you have to choose between good stewards of the environment and producing the energy that we need. In fact, I have co-sponsored many pieces of legislation to protect South Florida's many ecosystems. Because I recognize that the Everglades are a bona fide national treasure, attracting tourism and providing drinking water for much of our state. And as a master scuba diver and distance runner, I know how precious our reefs and our beaches are. South Florida's natural waters are far too important to play politics with. Yet, we can't let the beauty of our surroundings dissuade us from pursuing energy independence. Nor can we hope to foretell what the best route to that independence is. I know it's tempting for politicians to want to substitute their judgment for the wisdom of Marcus, but there's an important lesson in surrender and enter one. And all the other failed attempts at government venture capitalism for the past 3.5 years. The lesson is that when government chooses the winners and losers, it's more than just unfair. It's terrible business. Not only do you have companies struggling on a playing field that's been rigged to favor their competitors, but when one of those competitors fails, the rest of us get stuck with the bill. And fail they do. Because that's what we're learning, and that's what they have come to understand. There's no better way to send a promising firm into Chapter 11 than to promise them a bailout if anything goes wrong. You see, the free market without bankruptcy is like religion without hell. Why make good decisions if you know there won't be consequences to making bad ones? Wouldn't you be betting on a long shot if it was someone else's money on the table. Time and again, government makes itself an obstacle to progress. Time and again, policies meant to do one thing end up bringing about the opposite results and unintended consequences. And time again, our political establishment refuses to face the reality. The reality is that Washington, ladies and gentlemen, is broke. I know you're discouraged about the failure of leadership that you're seeing. And you know what? Having served 22 years in the United States military, I see the lack of honor, the lack of integrity, the lack of character, the lack of competence, the lack of conviction, the lack of commitment. And that's why there's a failure of leadership. And it's detestable to me as well. There are those trying hard, very hard to divide us along lines of race, class, and gender. See, they can't run on their records, so they're stirring up discord and division instead, just like those chuckleheads that are out there on the street corner. If they had something to say, if they had a solution to offer, they'd be somewhere reading, they'd be somewhere proposing legislation, they'd be somewhere using their brains and their talents for something else. But since they can't, all they can do is stand up and scream and shout and yell. And look at how well that ended up for them in Wisconsin. We all have a different vision for this country. One where we come together to support policies that benefit us all as Americans. Not favorite groups and special interests or one industry at the expense of the other. Not even the Shivs talked about. Not one party at the expense of another. So while they're busy fighting over who's the biggest bully, I and you, each and every one of us, are busy trying to figure out the results, the solutions, eliminating bureaucracies, promoting competition, clawing our way back to an American exceptionalism where everyone in this country can thrive. In many ways, when you think about Andrew and myself, our story, that is the American story. It's the American success story. A wife of mine, born to a Jamaican family, but now she sits with an MBA and a PhD, a daughter of a man who served. Our daughters now being brought up to understand those basic principles of individual responsibility and accountability, hard work, God, family. That's the key thing. Not looking to government to provide you a way forward, looking to yourself to provide the way forward. And that is the lesson that my parents taught me being brought up in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia. Today, as I always tell you, it's an incredible story that 51 years ago, this district that I represent, one of the wealthiest districts in the United States of America, is an area that my parents did not belong to. But now, because they believe in the greatness of exceptionalism and the uniqueness, the equality of opportunity in America, that's why their son stands before you today. So as you are here today, this election is all about the choice between two futures. It's an equality of opportunity that we have in America that's worth fighting for. And either we can stand together against the forces of government overreach, or you can surrender. Surrender your decision-making process. Surrender your individual sovereignty for a bunch of self-proclaimed political elites trying to centrally plan out your lives from cradle to grave. So what do you say?
Not me.
Are you ready? Yes. To make a stand for the longest running constitutional republic that the world has ever known? Because I tell you, if you are, I'm ready to stand with you.
All right.
calls for us to recommit to our fundamental principles. The fundamental principles of sovereignty and not servitude. Of serving a higher cause, not submitting to a higher authority. You know, some of you may not remember this movie, but it's one of my favorites. It's called Spartacus.
Yes. Yes.
And when Spartacus and all those slaves were captured, and they offered them the opportunity to turn him in to a man, each and every one of them stood and said, I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. Today, will you stand and say as they said, that you believe in liberty, that you believe in freedom, that you believe in this democracy that we have, that you believe in the God-given gifts that have been given to us in this great nation, so that you will not be shackled. You will not live in slavery to a government. You will live in power. Stand up, my brothers and sisters, and say, I am Spartacus.